The name of the exhibition is Temma in Aurora, and Temma is my daughter. My wife Sherry and our daughter is Temma de Loli, and I've made a lot of art related to Temma. She is severely and profoundly disabled, and people like her are usually not subjects of art. It's ethically problematic to make artwork of someone who can't give you consent. What does that mean? It means people like Temma aren't represented. And while that might be nice in terms of avoiding some sort of ethical problem, it's also deeply problematic in that it means there's a population in our country that's largely invisible and unknown and unconsidered. They have no value in a capitalist mindset, right? And which is stupid, simply stupid. But I'd say that also coming from a Christian orientation in terms of thinking about the least. And when Jesus talks, he talks about the importance of the least. You better pay attention because that's who actually is going to be up here, right? I think when I talked about this in terms of talking to these students earlier, this movement in Korea of the Minjung art is the idea of making art that's about those who are marginalized in the society. And for me, when I learned about that art movement, it was like, this is my home as an artist. And then Temma showed up. And you can imagine, I mean, it was, to be honest, the early life with Temma was devastating in terms of expectations, dreams, or whatever. It was much more difficult for Sherry in terms of all what happened around her birth, around Temma's birth. But ultimately, both of us, I think for both of us, we realized there is something here, there's a life here that definitely as important as any other life, but is also going to probably take us down paths we might not take otherwise. She's deeply influenced Sherry's work as a pastor, as a counselor, deeply influenced me as a professor, as a gallery director, not in ways that I could necessarily say this or that. And part of the reason I make art of Temma is actually pretty reflective of who Temma is. She doesn't do much. She doesn't, present a self. Almost every other human I know who is not disabled presents a self constantly. Consciously or not, we're constantly presenting a self. Temma does not present a self. Not in the same way. The self she presents is one that's utterly innocent. But she is not like a baby. For one thing, babies are selfish. If they have a wet diaper or something, they will cry and complain. Selfish is too strong a word, but they will complain. Temma rarely complains about anything. And you can see if she's in discomfort, she will facially and make sounds. But there's no, oh, I want that. There's none of that kind of sense of a competitive need to be pleased or whatever. So that's why I make art related to Temma. I started making art when I was maybe a sophomore in high school, junior. I do remember specifically once seeing seen an art show and someone had made a drawing of a pretty girl. I was like, I'd like to be able to do that. So there's some other motivations that enter into why you might make art. But as I got more interested in art and then went to college and was an art major, I learned more about art and what art can be, what it can do, and its cultural significance or lack thereof. My parents were missionaries in South Korea. My father was a hospital administrator and my mother taught piano and organ and puppetry in a women's college. And this was in Korea in the early 60s when it was really still sort of reviving from the Korean War. And so that experience growing up in another culture, I think had a pretty profound influence on me. The culture itself, the context, and actually a particular Korean artist and Korean art movement were very influential on me later in my time there. My wife and I actually got married. We went back there and taught English for a year. And that's when I met this Korean artist, Im Ok-sang, who is one of the main members of an art movement in Korea, which is It's associated with this idea of the Minjung. The Minjung are the people in society that are basically marginalized members of society. And I think meeting the artist I met really sort of opened a door of possibility of what I might pursue as an artist. So I don't think of my work as being overtly political, but I do have social, political, justice, other things are really significant to me and important to me. And it's a big part of the why with making art related to Temma. I'm convinced of the idea that making art as best as you can possibly make it as a way of engaging with the public is a pretty good idea. I studied art in college, and then one of the most important experiences I had was after my wife and I got married. About a year after that, we traveled through Europe for 6 weeks. And encountering works, and one thing sort of burned into my brain was encountering a large altarpiece by Giotto in the Uffizi Museum. It's not so much the religious subject matter as something that's made with so much conviction. To make a painting like these paintings is a lot of work. And to make it something that is actually moving on a level that's beyond its actual, we want you to make a painting of Mary with angels. Okay, that's one thing, but to make a painting that's doing this, what this painting's doing, which is going way beyond that, that's very convicting for me. It's like, and thinking to myself, what are we doing as contemporary artists today? What are we doing? Because I was paying quite a close attention to what was happening throughout the 20th century, modernism, all the different movements. And I wasn't seeing much that had this sense of very specific purpose related to what are you doing? What is the meaning of your life? And so that trip was really important. And actually, we have been back to Europe several times, including most recently last fall. Courbet is one artist he's not a Renaissance Baroque, but this artist Courbet, he's got some paintings that are just mind-blowing, that a human being actually made this. Some of the work, not much in this show, but one of the paintings was egg tempera. In that trip through Europe, one of the artists whose work I really love is Fra Angelico, who is actually a monk based in Florence. And I really love Fra Angelico's work in terms of the way in which egg tempera has a certain kind of luminosity to it. It's not like oil paint. You can make any paint look like something, but the virtue, if you want to call it that, in egg tempera painting is the paint has this kind of, it's a luminosity, it also is light. Oil paint can go really dark. Tempera doesn't do dark very well. So when I encountered his work and learned about egg tempera, I was like, I'll try studying and see how you make it. And so I discovered it's pretty simple to learn how to make it. But the most critical part of that whole process was actually learning what pigments do. Each pigment is unique in terms of its characteristics. For instance, there's a pigment, alizarin crimson. If you try and mix it with the medium, the pigment says, I don't want anything to do with this. It's like it flees, but then you have to work. But it has a certain kind of character in contrast to, say, chromium oxide green. It just sort of sucks up the. Now that doesn't really have much effect in terms of what the paint does eventually, but that's the point is that the pigments are in themselves a unique thing. They aren't simply a color. They're actually a material, right? So when you make your own paint, you learn about that. You're not just squeezing something out of a tube, you're actually learning about what this pigment is and can do, which I think is actually, well, it's not fundamentally meaningful, it is actually significantly meaningful. And if you make egg tempera, that's how you make paint. You can't buy it in a tube because it spoils within a week. So I started working with egg tempera, and then years later, Golden came out with a matte acrylic, and I realized I really liked the possibility of a paint I could sand and abrade and not be so careful with. Tempera is relatively fragile. Acrylic, matte acrylic is not. Most of the paintings here are acrylic. Occasionally I've made works, including there's a piece in here called Without Moving After Guy Chase. That was a collaborative work, and it's hard for most people don't know this. And we're going to show it actually so people can see the back, because the names of, I don't know, 150 people who worked on this piece over 10 years. And the way they worked on it was, I borrowed an idea from an artist friend of mine, where he had been making these drawings. He realized it was almost like a fluke. He was doing something like a joke where he decided to just make drawings that were just dots. So he started drawing dots, and his rule was draw the dots as close as possible to each other without touching and count them. And he realized after a while that it put him into this really concentrated meditative state, because he couldn't be thinking about anything. He was counting, right? And I was thinking, what if I appropriated Guy Chase's idea for this painting? So if anybody wanted to work on this, the background is dark gray, and they're painting with black paint on top of dark gray, so it's not immediately obvious, but if you get up close, you realize there's hundreds of thousands of dots on the background of that painting. They didn't just paint dots. The rule was you have to paint the dots in conjunction with what you've, like one dot here, one without touching the next dot, so you'll see rows of dots. And there are a few people who wanted to be fancy, so they'd make like some sort of pattern, but it all gets lost in there because it's just dots. And on the side of the painting is one hash mark for every 100 dots. I don't remember, it's like 180,000 or something like that. It's a huge number of dots. And it's a metaphor for the way in which people experience someone like Temma. They see her as being just a drain on society, someone who doesn't contribute or whatever. But then when you get up close and you experience someone who is profoundly innocent always and ever has been, right? When do we encounter humans like that? We don't. Most everybody else has an ego that we're like that, right? This new oval piece has a more complex collaborative aspect to it. I really like it, particularly when non-artists. I like it when artists join in, but I like it when non-artists, because they have a sense of, I contributed to this, even though it didn't really require skill. Everyone assumes that art requires skill. Well, as long as you can paint dots without having the dots touch, that's all I'm asking here. In that oval is my wife, Sherry, on the left, and in the middle is Temma. And she has her mouth open, is sticking her tongue out. She sticks her tongue out a lot. It has no, social, she just sticks her tongue out. Beside her is a woman named Ellen Herbert, and Ellen has been Temma's caregiver for about at least 10 years. One thing about my work with Temma is over the last 15, 20 years, I've made various projects. So for instance, Rainbow Girl, which was going to be the title of this show, is actually a specific project where I made paintings of Temma in relation to specific European paintings from the Renaissance and Baroque era. So that's one project, and I made another project called Radiator Project, which was thinking about one day after giving it to my bath, and she was lying there, so she radiates. And I was thinking, what if I make a series of paintings arbitrarily? Every title starts with the letter R, and that's to sort of signify her limitation. But at the same time, each word is suggesting what kind of sort of, for lack of a better word, mystical agency she has. So she radiates. So this new series happened when I had an image that I really liked of Temma, and I had taken a photograph of the night sky, and I combined them in this painting and made it black and white. And I was like, no, this is doing something different. It harkens back to a lot of my early tempera paintings I made were vertical format, and they had this kind of allegorical quality about them. And I like the idea, this new series, I think is going to be a similar kind of thing, these vertical black and white images that will be accompanied by a text probably written or co-written with my wife. My wife, Sherry, is an author and writer. And so it may end up being a book. A lot of the paintings here, it's just Temma with no setting. These paintings will all have a setting, and sort of by implication there'll be a narrative. And so I did this painting, and it was funny when I did this painting, and I saw this is different. And within a week, I had about a dozen possibilities like taking from photographs, and so I'm excited about doing that. And black and white, to be honest, is much faster. And the truth is, this painting, I've been doing primarily drawings for the last 4 years, drawings of a person and place. Those drawings on average are taking me at least 5 weeks, sometimes as much as 3 or 4 months for one drawing. This painting took me about 2 weeks or less. I don't know what, maybe it's because of the drawing you got this pointed thing as I was brushing. But anyway, that's what's going on with my current art practice, and it's nice.